The frying pan hisses like rain on a tin roof when Amina lifts the lid and breath hits the air. Pepper, oil, the sharp green of chopped garden egg. Her hand closes around a small metal tiffin, a dented lunchbox with a faded sticker of a forgotten football team. The tin is warm from the stove. It smells of stewed fish and onion and a kind of patient comfort. Outside on the narrow street, a motorbike screams past and a dust plume rolls under the eaves of her stall. A thin boy with knees like dried twigs stands at the corner of her counter, rubbing his stomach. Amina looks at him, then at the plate on the other side of the counter where an old man works, rubbing his own. For a sliver of a second she counts coins in her head, then makes the quick choice the night has taught her. She lifts the tiffin, forks a piece of plantain onto a second plate and pushes it toward the boy without a word. The boy's eyes are big. The scent of food is bigger. He takes the plate with hands that shake and breathes as if the air itself is softer now. Somewhere high above the city in a glass tower that catches the sun like a white blade, a man in a quiet suit watches a tiny grain of a scene through a lens and decides to step into another life. Kwame Mensah sits very still in his office in Osu, where the windows run floor to ceiling and the city seems to bow. He built shipping lines and night markets with his name, and his voice rarely rises above the low hum of air conditioners and distant horns. His security feeds are a world of small miracles, and on the loop that morning a door opens, a child reaches, and a woman shares a plate. The image lodges in him like a seed. He does not believe in seeds, not usually. He believes in contracts and projects and returns, but the image breaks something thin inside his chest. He asks for the clip to be tracked back to a street name and is told it is at a place called Jamestown Lane by the old lamp post, a sputtering corner that smells of tar and fried cassava. He orders a driver to move, but the driver tells him the lane is too narrow for a new car. He removes his tie with fingers he has trained to be gentle and tells the driver to walk. A different kind of boldness is born when a man of money trades comfort for ground. Amina runs her little counter from dawn to dusk, flipping akara and folding jollof into small foil parcels. The counter is a plank of wood under a corrugated roof between a barber and a phone repair stall. It belongs to no one and to many. Cords run like veins under the planks, and the rain in the season finds weak spots and sings. Her tiffin arrived 2 years ago, battered and given by her mother the day Amina came home with a baby on her hip and hope in her pocket. She does not expect patrons with crisp suits or flat shoes. She expects the city's honest hunger and the kindness that comes from sharing sugar with someone who has none. When a man in a quiet suit, without the usual shadow of security, walks down Jamestown Lane and stands with his hands in his pockets, she watches him like she does everything in the market, alert but not afraid. He smiles and says, "Your name is Amina, yes?" He does not offer money at first. He offers a kind look that does not fit in the lane. The first obstacle is that Amina answers with a simple yes and goes back to her work. He must learn to be patient in a place that teaches patience by pushing you hard. Kwame learns to move with less noise. He returns the next day in a cap and faded jeans, a small, quiet man among many loud lives. He worries that his wealth makes his steps like thunder. He tells Amina he liked the way she shared. She brushes a curl from her forehead and asks, "Which one?" The question is cautious as a hawk. She never heard the clip. It was a neighbor who sent it to the market chat. It had become a town rumor by lunch. Kwame lets his hand rest on the counter as if the wood is a map. He offers to buy her a stove. Amina laughs a short, startled laugh. Money has the soft sound of rain on aluminum, but it also has teeth. Her first obstacle is pride. Her second is memory. Her mother warned her long ago not to make deals with men who build tall things. Her mother said such men build cities that do not always hold the poor. Amina thinks of the tiffin and the dent that looks like a small moon and says, I sell rice, not ideas. Outside, the smell of bread and hot oil moves like a tide through Jamestown, and small boys run as if they are sails. Word of the man in a suit spreads. He is Kwame Mensah, people whisper, and his name is like a thunder rumble. That is the second obstacle for him. His name is a hazard to the safety of the people he wants to meet. When he returns the third time, he brings a small paper that reads, "Micro loans for small businesses." He wants to write a check. Amina folds the paper into her apron pocket and keeps cleaning plates. Then Kojo, the landlord in a flapping shirt and a voice like rust, appears at her stall with a letter. He slams it down and says, "Council says you pay rent or you move." The councilor, Yaw Duku, is a man whose smile can sell a rainless day. He is the third obstacle, wrapped in a velvet tie and greed. He wants Amina out so he can lease the corner to a new shop with glass. Amina cannot pay an old debt all at once. She offers to work the land instead. Yaw laughs and lifts his cigarette to his lips as if the smoke is a scepter. The market listens and whispers. Fatima, who sells tomatoes with a dignity that could carry a throne, warns Amina that Yaw Duku takes more than rent. He takes the small hopes and decides which ones will live in the shade. The videos on the phones of traders show Kwame stepping into the lane and speaking to Amina. A new rumor spreads that the man wants to buy the whole corner and build, and traders tighten their lips. The fourth obstacle is suspicion from the very people Kwame wants to help. He tries a different way. He goes to the chapel, kneels with hands not accustomed to prayer, and asks for a name, asking for a way to help that keeps the life of the street alive. Then a small headline appears in the Sunday paper. Billionaire Eyes Market Corner. The city hums with sour notes. Kwame finds that charity can fossilize into rumor, like water turning to stone. Amina refuses any grand offer. She says no to a new stove when she imagines losing her table. She says no to toilets when they come at a price. Her choice is to keep the lane alive, which means paying what she does not have. The landlord appears more often like a weather pattern. He brings men who measure with long arms and cold eyes. The fifth obstacle becomes physical. A notice says an inspector will come, and if the stall is not to code, it will be shut. Amina scrambles to fix a hole, to patch a roof with borrowed nails. Kwame watches from the glass tower and buys a small ladder for her. Amina calls him Sir once, then later Kwame when he brings a kettle. The first small bridge forms. The man with ships and the woman with a tiffin find common air. Then the midpoint twist arrives like a rain that changes the river. On a heavy afternoon when the market is hot and the sun has a hard edge, a thin boy named Seifu hums an old lullaby as he divides a plantain in two. The melody is the one Kwame's mother sang years ago before she disappeared in a fire that closed a door inside him and left ash on his memory. Kwame hears the tune through a clip on his phone that a trader sends. Seifu humming as he waits for food. The same lullaby appears in an old photograph of a child on Kwame's grandmother's wall, a photograph that Kwame keeps in a drawer. A sudden, painful recognition snaps like a twig. Seifu is the child of the woman who used to carry Kwame on her back as a boy, a woman Kwame's family handled badly when they were young and heavy with pride. The small act of sharing in Jamestown was not a stranger's kindness to a random child. It is a knot in his own story. The revelation flips everything. What started as a curiosity becomes a ledger of memory. The tin tiffin that Amina holds is not just a lunchbox. It looks like one Kwame's mother once carried, dent by the same pattern, with a sticker half peeled away. Suddenly the city shrinks. Every alley is a line on the same map. Kwame cannot know whether to step into responsibility or flee into the work that built him. He chooses to stay. This new knowledge changes his motives, but it does not make his path smooth. The moment the market suspects a personal tie, eyes sharpen and questions spread. Kwame's publicist circulates a note that the billionaire is considering a community grant. Yaduku hears and smiles with the kind of smile that means danger. He sues for demolition of the stall on a technicality and calls the press with a rumor. The area is unsafe. Seifu's mother had died young, and the rumor is that Amina is a woman of loose ways, perhaps not to be trusted. Amina stands at the sink, hands raw from washing plates, and sees her name washed thin in the soap bubbles. A small photograph surfaces on a message board, a picture of Amina near a different man years ago, and the city does what cities do best. It mixes truth with rumor and forgets the difference. Kwame's second obstacle becomes the public. When he writes a check, the check is accompanied by a headline. He means to mend, but his money comes with a noise that attracts vultures. Then, the day the fire comes, everything becomes ash and choice. It is a night with a wind that eats at the tarpaulins. A motorbike with two men rides the lane with headlights like small moons and stops near Amina's stall. A flaming rag thrown like a lit match lands on the old roof. Flames lick the corrugated sheets, hungry for the market's long history. People pull buckets, scream, and push at the burning air. Amina lets out a noise that sounds like someone tearing cloth. She throws her arms into the water like hands that are older than they look. The tiffin, the small metal moon of her life, sits on a shelf as if it knows the danger and then melts in the heat. If metal can scream, it does. The market has a smell of iron and oil and something like the end of a marriage. Kojo, the landlord, watches with pale lips. Yaduku is nowhere, melting away in paperwork. The city, in a moment, asks itself who will carry the small lives forward. Amina's restaurant is gone, ash where her bowls used to be. This is the crisis. Her work is burned, her tiffin is bent beyond recognition, and a small savings box with the last of her money has vanished in the debris. She collapses on a curb with hands that still smell like pepper. She must choose. Take the billionaire's public aid and rebuild in his terms, which might mean the loss of the lane's character, or refuse and try to gather neighbors to rebuild by themselves with barely enough nails. The choice sits like a hot coal. Kwame is the first at her side. He carries her to a small clinic and sits in a plastic chair while she sleeps, fingers drum-calling on his thigh. He offers a fund, an amount that would rebuild every stall and still be small for his books. He says, "I'll cover the rest." But Amina hears the echo of demands she does not want. A new roof, a clean facade, a requirement that the lane become improved in a way the lane's soul does not survive. She remembers her mother's warning about men who build tall things. She looks at Kwame and sees both a man who built and a man who can overwrite. She stands and says, "No, not like this." The public is watching. A journalist stands with a notebook. The mayor wants a photograph. For a few days, the city seems to hold its breath to see whether a small woman will accept a man's offer or whether pride will be punished by hunger. Kwame offers a second time, quieter, without cameras. "What if we build together? You own it. You set the rules." Amina looks at him as if he is speaking a language that is new. She folds her arm around Seifu, who is thin now but steady, and says, "Then we will name it for those who gave it to us." She will not be bought with a ribbon. The multi-climax unfolds in a way that looks like a play written by the city itself. Kwame uses his reach to call a public meeting in the square of Jamestown, with microphones and a truck stage and the mayor on one side who smells of polished shoes and promises. Yaduku, confident in the rubble that gets him power, arrives with a group of men who imagine themselves importantly. The spectacle begins at dawn. A crowd gathers, a thin flag snaps in the wind, and someone sets a pot of stew on a stack of crates, as if theater needs aroma. Fatima stands with a phone, and through the glass of a shop a young girl has recorded a clip the night of the fire. In the clip, two men in masks move like shadows near the stall with a bottle. She posts the clip and adds a caption. The clip goes viral in the day. An unexpected witness appears, Kojo's own assistant, who had been paid with the promise of new contracts, steps forward, shaking. He says Ya Duku demanded strong-arming. He coughs and hands a small packet of bank slips to the magistrate. The camera follows the paper like a snake. Kwame, who knows how to open documents quietly, spreads evidence of bank transfers and plans across the stage. The audience sees numbers and dates. The city recognizes its own pattern. Yaduku's face does what faces do when walls fall. It loses color. He had imagined that power would stick like oil to his fingers. It slides away under public light. He attempts a speech about development, but one of the traders holds up the burned tiffin, recovered from a neighbor's pile, and the dent that was once a moon is now a crater. The tiffin is a symbol that the crowd catches and keeps. Kwame speaks with a voice that never breaks. He reveals the deal made with Yaw to take the land and how the plan would have leveled the lane and given the counselor a share for his friends. The spectacle becomes a courtroom of public opinion. The police arrive and lead Yaw away with handcuffs that look like cold iron. The man who thought he ruled small corners of the city is stripped of his power in public, his name a thin paper being read. The crowd shouts in a wave, and Fatima lifts a bowl in the air like a chalice. The unexpected witness, the assistant, is offered witness protection, and the mayor receives complaints built like a tower. In the end, the law moves like a slow animal, but it moves, and Yaduku's smile is catalogued as a memory. Once the antagonist is stripped of his power, the city has to decide what to do with the pieces. Kwame does not simply replace disappearances with money. He opens a fund, yes, but he also signs papers in public to create a cooperative, Jamestown Commons, so that the people who were burned can rebuild their street by their rules. He steps down metaphorically from his tower to sit on a crate and share a plate with traders, listening to the rhythm of their needs. Amina takes a seat at the table of the cooperative. She does not become a creature of his label. Instead, she runs a small training where she teaches others the way she folds jollof and stews fish. She keeps one leg of her independence and borrows another from the community. The tiffin becomes a small relic in a clear box at the cooperative office, not as a relic to be worshipped, but a reminder to feed the small ones first. Months of repair follow. The cooperative holds meetings in the morning and in the evenings. Hands that once trembled from work now hold hammers with steadier fingers. Kwame helps draft a legal covenant that protects microstalls from abrupt eviction. This covenant becomes part of a pilot law in the city. Journalists write pieces that smell of ink and hope. A small bakery opens. Under a sign, Amina paints herself with shaky but bold strokes. She names it Tin Moon, because sometimes the dent in a tin becomes the place stars gather. The third obstacle, the public suspicion, fades as people meet and eat and share stories about what the lane used to be like. Kwame, who once watched life like an owner watches his fleet, learns to queue like everyone else and wait for a plate. He discovers the taste of boarding a bus without being recognized, the chance to be invisible and human. The boy Seifu grows like a plant turned toward a new sun. He goes to school on a scholarship. Kwame quietly funds and keeps it. His lunch in a new tiffin stamped with the cooperative's logo. 6 months later, the city is a little different. The cooperative runs a lending system that gives loans in small measures and in trust, not in contracts. Amina teaches mornings and tends the bakery at noon. And in the evenings she sits with neighbors and plays a board game that is older than the city. The tiffin that was once dented and then burned is now replaced in the clear case by a new object, a small bronze tin cast from the melted remains of the old one, sitting on a wooden plinth with a small plaque that reads, "For those who share." The bronze catches sun like a small promise. There is a law in the city now that requires notice and community consultation before stalls are removed, a measure that started small and will, if protected, change many lives across the district. Kwame signs the ordinance and then, in a small moment nobody photographs, he kneels in the lane and sweeps the crumbs from a bench with a borrowed broom. He does not sign a building plan for the corner. Instead, he sits down to the first loaf Amina baked after the rebuilding and eats with his hands like everyone else. The city listens and breathes, and the lane hums in the ordinary way of places that have been given oxygen. There is a public celebration on the 6-month mark. A new plaque, a ribbon cut by Amina and an official, a pot of stew shared with a steam that rises into the afternoon and knits faces together. Seifu runs among the crowd and tugs at the coat of a visiting schoolteacher, pointing at a tree they planted together. Kwame stands in the back and watches, his hands folded, a smile like a small window. The lesson of the lane is not just that money can fix a roof, but that people need respect to rebuild their own stories. Amina holds the bronze tiffin in her hands during the ceremony and thinks of the night it burned, how the world could change in a single breath. She remembers the choice she made to keep the lane's character instead of taking a tidy contract, and the way that choice nearly broke her and then made her whole. The city applauds in a way that sounds like rain after a long season. At dusk, when the crowd thins and the lamps cast gold on the street, Kwame walks with Amina toward the new bakery. She leads with a steady step and he listens as she tells a small joke. She calls him by his first name and then adds, "Kwame, you gave us keys, but we built the house." He laughs and feels a softness like warm bread. The bronze tiffin sits inside the bakery in a corner, and people stop to touch it as if touching a kind of new coin that buys nothing. The lane keeps its uneven stones and its crooked sign. A city official arrives to take photographs for the paper, but the real story stays in the way a woman folds rice into foil and hands it across a counter. That night, a child who once stood at the corner eats with both hands and keeps a little of his food to share with a friend. Someone records it and posts the clip. It spreads slowly, like a good rumor. 6 months later, real changes have settled like dust in places where people can still breathe. There is a new law about evictions, a cooperative that teaches small business skills, and a modest scholarship for kids like Seifu. Kwame steps back and allows the cooperative to manage funds without his fingerprints on every ledger. He learns that power can be given away without losing it. Sometimes it multiplies. Amina opens a second counter with a sign that reads, in small letters, "For those who share." The city folds that corner into its larger map differently now, with small protections that we hope will hold. The bronze tiffin is placed on the shelf as both relic and promise, the dent made whole by new metal. Amina keeps her old habit of dividing plantain and giving away half. She says it tastes better that way. True wealth is the kindness you give, not the money you keep. Do you agree? Yes or no? If this story moved you, subscribe and share to keep these real African stories alive. Join our small community with a kind comment below. On the 6-month mark, Jamestown hums with a gentler electricity. The lanterns swing, the crates creak, and the bronze tiffin glints in its glass case like a small sun. Amina and Seifu stand near the bakery counter watching the crowd drift in as Kwame, wearing a plain shirt and a calm smile, moves through them the way a tide passes ashore, quiet but inexorable. The air carries the scent of fried fish, cassava, and rain that never fully arrives, and somewhere a danfo horn blares in a way that makes the heart pace a bit faster, as if the street itself is catching its breath for a verdict. Tonight, there is a rumor that the city will name Jamestown Commons, a cooperative that belongs to the people, and many eyes turn toward the stage truck, where a banner of pale gold carries the word "Together" in bold letters, letters that once hovered over a tower and now hover over a lane painted with memory. A courier slips a sealed envelope into a volunteer's hand, and another message is flashed on a phone screen. An invitation to a press conference that will reveal the donor's identity, or at least reveal the structure behind the gift. The first question in the air, the one that tugs at every throat, is simple and dangerous. Who owns the future of this corner? The second question follows quickly. How will this city handle a wealth that can rebuild roofs in a night but cannot erase the scars of hunger and fear? Amina feels the tiffin warm against her hip where she keeps it for luck, the dented curve of metal recalling a moon that once informed her decisions, and she glances at Kwame, who has learned to smile modestly when the town demands miracles, then to look away when the town asks him to bear the weight of every answer. The crowd shifts like a tide under a low sun, and the market's chorus, clattering cups, drums from a passing group of kids, the soft hiss of a rice pot, drops into a sin. Gle. Listening hush as a man in a neat suit steps onto the stage, the fabric of his jacket catching light the way a fish hooks air, and he speaks not with triumph, but with a patient gravity that holds the square still. The lantern's chair, a woman in a dress the color of dawn over the Atlantic, speaks next, and what she says lands like a seed in a crack of concrete. The project is a living instrument, not a monument. It will grow in daylight and in shade, and it will bend to the needs of those who live here, not just the needs of those who invest. The audience is not a sea of faces, but a mosaic of stories. Old sellers who remember when the roof leaked in every storm, a group of teenagers who learned to count beans and dreams in the same breath, a grandmother who still carries her jars of peppers to the same stall every Sunday. Amina keeps her hands steady, but her breath shortens the moment the first page slides from the envelope and lands on the lectern with a polite thud, a covenant, a timetable, a ledger, and a line that names the donor as the Lantern Foundation, with a note that a panel of community representatives will oversee disbursements and keep the funds honest. A murmur runs along the line of stalls. Eyes flick between Kwame and the crowd, between the donor's quiet signature and the realities of rent and bills that still press on the shoulders of those who fed a child with a dented tiffin 2 years ago. The journalists press their recorders closer, hungry not just for a victory story, but for a map of who will own the future of this street. And a voice speaks in the back, a trader who has watched promises bloom and wither. If the donor is the lantern, who speaks for the people when the lights go off and the money doesn't arrive as fast as the wind? The question lands, and the square holds its breath as if a door has opened to let in a storm. And then, Chloe says again with a sigh. The midway turn arrives not with a shout but with a whisper of paper and memory. From the edge of the crowd, Kojo's former assistant, tired hands, careful, unafraid, steps forward with the official document in his palm and speaks in a steady voice that carries to the far corner where a grandmother taps a rhythm on a kettle to keep time for her granddaughter's dance lesson. He testifies that the push to remove the stalls came not from a single mind, but from a chain of demands that reached from a municipal office to a private desk, to a council room that smelled of cigarette smoke and old money. He names names and dates, and the room, which had been listening for a gift, suddenly begins listening for accountability. The lantern's face remains serene, but the crowd's energy shifts. The people want the money, yes, but they want the process that will decide what is built and who gets to speak when the vision is realized. The second turning point arrives when Seifu, who has learned to keep pace with adults without losing his own childlike wonder, steps onto the stage with a toy drum his aunt gave him and begins to beat a rhythm that sounds like rain on zinc roofs and the distant patter of a market rainstorm that never quite comes. The beat anchors the moment. If the oath to build with the people's voices is to endure, it must sound in the lane every day, not just in a press conference. And then, perhaps most quietly, a figure in the crowd, a trader who keeps the tally of every coin that changes hands, raises his voice not to accuse but to propose. A council that meets twice a month under the old tarpaulin canopy, minutes read aloud, a rotating chair chosen by lot, a rule that every project begins with a shared meal and ends with a shared plate. The public demonstration that follows is no longer about a single benefactor. It is about a system. Amina hears the clink as coins slay into a shared fund, the clamor of neighbors who debate what to repair first, the soft thud of a new hammer meeting wood, and the sound of the old roof's key turning in its latch as the rain on zinc roof finally worsens into a promise. The interval's echo arrives as a revelation. Kwame, who has walked the line between wealth and witness, steps away from the podium and slides into the crowd, not to bask in gratitude, but to listen, to learn, to answer a child's question with a simple, honest answer that ancient wisdom would approve. The wealth is not what makes us human. It is what we do with what we have when no one is watching. He does not declare a new empire. He asks a question instead. What if the first two buildings we repair are the two roofs that keep a family dry and the two doors that keep a grandmother warm? What if the cooperative writes its own rules on glass and wood, and the city awards a charter that protects those rules from ever being rewritten by a single state or single seller? The crowd responds with hands lifted and faces turned toward the stage, as if to catch the light they need to believe in a future they can hold. The twist deepens when a text message slides across a phone screen held by Fatima, who runs tomatoes with a dignity that could cradle a throne. The message reveals that the Lantern Foundation's most powerful commissioners have pledged not to take ownership of a single plot, but to seed a network of small markets across the city, each run by neighborhood councils who report their budgets openly, each anchored by a bronze tiffin that travels between lanes as a talisman of shared abundance. The phrase, hidden billionaire identity, becomes less a secret and more a design. The donor is not a single man in a suit, but a constellation of people who have learned that true power lies not in being seen, but in seeing others, not in owning land, but in freeing the land to belong to everyone who tends it. Kwame's face changes shape in the light. He has not hidden his wealth so much as chosen to let it be a background hum, a current that moves the council forward while the people decide the melody. Amina's breath steadies as she realizes that the money will come with transparency, not with a price tag on her shoulder for living in a corner that someone else wants to own. The lantern chair nods, acknowledging the turn, and inviting a final question that the crowd, now firmly on the ailing road toward healing, asks in chorus. Will this be a model that the entire city can borrow? A living library of lanes where every stall holds a story and every policy holds a plate? The answer, when it arrives, comes not from the center but from the edges, from the traders who have fed a family through a storm, and from a mother who once warned her daughter that the tall men with tall plans do not always guarantee that the poor will be safe. The couple of weeks that follow feel like a second season of a show you think you know, and then discover you must live again. A legal covenant drafted by a council T. Hat includes Amina and Seifu and old Fatima and Kojo's assistant. A budget that is read aloud at every meeting, a first round of community loans issued with the same caution as a first handshake, a first cooperative harvest of corn and peppers and plantains that is cooked into a community feast for every face in the square. The wind shifts gentler now as the market finds its rhythm, the Danfo horns soften into a lullaby. The rain finally visits the zinc roofs as a gift rather than a threat, and the bronze tiffin, the same dent that once forewarned hardship, now rests in a corner of Tin Moon Bakery, polished and revered not as a relic, but as a living coin of the city's promise. The city's wealth gap tension remains real, but it now moves toward a new balance, a balance between the power that money can command and the power that comes from a shared plate, between the speed of a donor's check and the patience of a neighbor who rebuilds a roof with his own hands, between the private shadow of a foundation and the public light of a candid council that laughs together and bears the heat together and shares the work of keeping a lane alive. Writing on the wall, literally, a new plaque near the doorway that reads, in neat script, "For those who share," glows softly, catching the golden hour, and the last lines before the final beat arrive with a quiet certainty. The street has learned what it means to own something because you helped to raise it, and the people who fed a child with a dented tiffin 2 years ago now feed a city with a plan that honors every bite and every breath alike. True wealth is the kindness you give, not the money you keep. Do you agree? Yes or no? If this story moved you, subscribe and share to keep these real African stories alive. Join our small community with a kind comment below.